Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Co-Creators of a New World. It is a new world, and that new world has already begun, and it's in our hearts and our minds, and in the connections we have with one another. I'm your host, Kathleen Hanagan, and this is a celebration with an amazing group of co-creators from all over the world who are here to help me really celebrate the birth of my book, Love Seed, the template for birthing a new world. And the thought that I could do this with so many people that I'm connected to occurred to me a few months ago, and it's been happening, and it's been a beautiful expression of co-creation. And today I have somebody who is a remarkable woman who is actually in the greater DC area and has introduced shamanism and so much to people in this area. Angela Blueskies. Hello, Angela.
Hi, sister. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm so glad to have you. And I'm going to read your bio so that people get a sense of who you are. And I mean, the real sense I got of who you are was when I went to your music, your gong, and your music events. And I hope some of that comes through today, who you are in that way. It's such a powerful force. So let me tell you, Angela is an initiate of the Q'ero healing tradition from the high Andes Mountains and has journeyed to Peru for over a decade to learn directly from shamans, mentors, healers, and medicine men and women. As an energy medicine practitioner, she holds space for the healing and awakening of all those who are called to the path, no matter where they are on the journey. She is also a co-founder of Rumiwasi Sanctuary in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and the Heart of the Mother retreats in Peru and Costa Rica. She is also well known as a visionary musician and sound medicine practitioner. Angela visions a world where people live in balance and harmony with themselves, with each other, and the natural world. And truly, I will say that you have taken the art of being a modern day shaman to a new level, because it's, demystified in the way you do it. It's so beautiful. It really is. And it's so deep. What I want to do is read this excerpt from my book, which has to do with a lot of what the work you do. Angela's going to be talking about no more spiritual bypassing, the importance of embracing the shadow. So this is a piece about that from my book. And the subtitle is, What is the Shadow Really? Our paths are carved by the most inconspicuous thoughts, often never discovered. Every human being carries a shadow, and the less awareness we have of this part of us, the more powerful and more dense it is, exerting its wobbling effect in all we do until we find ourselves completely off course. Not only are there individual shadows we must contend with, but also familial, cultural, and collective shadows. These occur when we project onto a group of people qualities and attributes that are disowned or repressed in the society at large. The United States has a huge sexual shadow, as we have not fully integrated Puritanism with the hedonistic yearnings that became stronger the more they were repressed. The deep, dark shadow of slavery that was not fully integrated during the civil rights movement continues to rear its head today in the racial tension that plagues the land of the free today. Partial integration does not work, but reinforces the repression when we believe we are over it. We don't get over our shadow or grow out of our shadow, but we must learn to integrate it fully, which means doing a great deal of reparation for the damage it has caused, as anyone who has ever done the steps in AA can attest to. Often the amends are more to the self. We must then incorporate the shadow into the other aspects of who we are, which entirely transforms who we thought we were. Something new is created out of the darkness. Due to the way we're wired and have developed, no one avoids the shadow. So beware the person who plays the saint. The shadow is most often associated with darkness, fear, and danger. And yet that is simply a cultural myth. But there also can be power, goodness in the shadow. And goodness comes from facing one's shadow. The shadow contains what we perceive to be our negative traits, negative aspects of self we don't like, the parts that aren't so pretty or acceptable, or aspects of self we may hold in disdain or even contempt. In some circles, it's even called the lower self. Encounter with the shadow is often described in metaphors such as facing our demons, slaying the dragon, dark night of the soul, or more common midlife crisis. Addictions develop as we medicate the perceived pain that the encounter of the encounter, and the nervous system breakdown, or the nervous breakdown, happens when we refuse the encounter. As you can see, burying the love seed is closely related to the development of the shadow in childhood, where we learn to put away parts of ourselves that were not valued by our family or culture. As we bury those parts, we also bury the emotions associated with the lack of acceptance or devaluation. This leads us to bury the shame and feelings of worthlessness with the shadow, as well as the anger at losing a part of ourselves. We were not taught how to live with and embrace these vulnerable emotions, and the longer we ignore them, the stronger these exiled parts in us become. The greater the wounding and trauma, the more split off, the more buried. As Robert Bly says in a little book on the human shadow, every part of our personality that we do not love will become hostile to us. And that's what people think of when they think of the shadow as something very dark and evil. It's when we don't face it that we have to face the darkness and the evil, right? That's what creates the problems. And you do this work as a shaman, as a healer. How did you come to this, Angela? Because this is work like I do in psychotherapy. That's what people come to me for, and they also go to you for that. So how did you come to it?
How did I come to it in my own life or in my work?
Both.
Okay.
Because in order to really do it in your work, you have to really do have to face your own.
Absolutely. And I think that what you brought up that's so interesting is that the work of psychotherapy and the work of shamanic healing and energy medicine are literally two concurrent tracks doing the same work in a completely different kind of way, but very complementary. And so maybe we can put a placeholder to come back to that little bit of conversation later. So I grew up in the Bible Belt in East Tennessee, in a very conservative place where there was a very clear picture of what was right and what was wrong that I still see playing out today, especially on, a week where we've had elections. There's some very clear pictures of that societally happening right now. And so I grew up in the midst of that, but felt really uncomfortable with it somehow through my whole youth. And once I left Tennessee, when I moved to Baltimore for college, I started to explore spirituality in a much bigger sense. And I also started to discover who I was when I was out from under the pressure of a societal expectation on the way things are. Yeah. And so in my own life, I started to realize that I had been suppressed in a lot of ways, creatively, mentally, in the way that I was in relationship with people. And I was really curious about that. And so I literally put my hands on every book I could find connected to every spiritual tradition under the sun. And I have to say that one of the most potent moments in that journey for me was with my dear friend, Doug, who I got to see for the first time in 20 years this year. And what he said to me when we were both in our first year of undergrad was, in response to a world civilization class where we were talking about the Reformation and a lot of religious history of Western Europe. And he said, "Do you believe in all of that?" And it was the first time in my life someone ever asked me if I believed in the tenets of Christianity and the subsequent dominance it's had in this culture. And it was like a light bulb went off over my head. And I realized that I had a choice. And so from there, I started exploring paganism and Wicca and Buddhism and Hinduism and like the integral work of Ken Wilber. And I just started to like swallow it as quickly as I could, because I honestly didn't even realize there were options. And through that work, I really started to understand that in addition to some of these really powerful spiritual ideals about self-realization and enlightenment, there were also some really potent teachings about how to connect with the darkness that we carry inside of ourselves and befriend that. Yeah. And I think it took me probably 15 years to really like make sense of that in myself. But as I continued to be very persistent on that journey, it really pushed me into looking at the things that I had been handed by my family and my society and my schools. Like, what are the beliefs that I've been told are the truth, that are really just trying to keep me programmed to be a certain way in my society. And it was really having my first direct connection with shamanism in Peru that started to blow the lid off of all of that.
I certainly can understand that. It was a big awakening for me going to Peru. And it's interesting, as you were talking about, because I have several clients who've been in those kind of restrictive Christian, and also all from the South, interestingly, faiths that where, it's all about the light, and anything that is dark is the devil. It's outside of you. It's not inside you. It's outside of you. And it's to be feared, and to, and anything of the devil you stay away from. So it divides you from others, and what I've found is that the people who grew up in that, there was good to the faith, right? There was good to being aware of spirit and community. But once you start to question the beliefs, many people feel so bereft, like they have to leave all that. But what I've been finding is many people are moving toward shamanism as a way to have that connection, but direct. So I want to, would you share your direct experience from Peru? Is that something you'd be willing to do?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's one other thing that, like what you just said, like in one moment from high school that you inspired me to want to share first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I remember being about 15 years old, and all of my friends were very Christian and very conservative. And I grew up in a family that was Christian, but we didn't go to church all the time or anything like that. And I literally felt inclined to pretend that we had a regular church so that I wouldn't be ostracized. And I just remember sitting in the Bible club before school, which is where all my friends were. So I felt inclined to be there too. And I felt so scared that they were going to ask me to lead the prayer, because even then, even though I had no exposure to anything other than that, I felt uncomfortable with it. So it was just, there was something in me that was pulling me on already, even though I had no understanding of what it was.
Yeah.
So Peru, I went to Peru for the first time in 2005 when I was in graduate school. I was at Goddard College in Vermont as a part of their individualized program. And so I was in the process of doing a study of pilgrimage and what it means to seek the sacred in the 21st century, when we're no longer bound by religious doctrine or cultural expectation. So what does it mean to seek the sacred on our own? And so I had walked the Camino de Santiago in 2004, and that I did. And that was really what started to unfold the rest of my path. So in 2005, I was called to go to Peru and Bolivia to explore a living indigenous tradition. As I had heard that my own ancestry was native to this country, I think I unconsciously was seeking my own roots. I just couldn't see it yet. So I went to Peru and Bolivia as a part of my field work and research for my study. And I was very blessed to wander for 6 weeks with no real, I didn't have a plan. I just had a plane ticket into Lima and a plane ticket out of La Paz, and an advisor who wanted to hear from me every few days. And so I put myself in the middle of as many things as I could, but it was really connecting in Cusco with this young shaman that was a real bright point on that journey. And he took me for 2 days all around the mountains of Cusco to a bunch of sacred sites, some of which have become favorites of mine, others which I've never been able to find again. And we made offerings and we prayed and we connected with the land and the stones and the river and the trees and the apus, the mountains, Pachamama, Mother Earth. And I had never been exposed to anything like that before. And it made me both nervous and extremely curious. And so on our second day, we went with his grandfather, who was probably 100 years old at the time. And we did despacho ceremony on the top of a high open mountain near Chinchero. And at that point, he told me, the young shaman could speak fluent English and several other languages, as well as Spanish and Quechua. And his grandfather, I think, only spoke Quechua. And he said to me, my grandfather says that you make your own despacho. We've never done this before. Nobody else outside of our community has ever been told to make despacho before. Wow. And I thought, I don't really understand what despacho is, but great. So just as a placeholder for that, despacho is a sacred offering ceremony, kind of similar to the Tibetan sand mandala, in that a beautiful nature mandala is made, every item placed in with prayers, and then burned or buried or offered to the waters so that the prayers are carried forward. So he continued to tell me as we made our despacho side by side, like, this is actually my job. I've been trained since I was a child to do this. I don't understand why my grandfather says you do it, but he says at this point, it's more important that people learn these traditions, that people have direct communication with spirit, than people do it our way. And so we made the despachos, and I went about my journey, and it was beautiful. And then I came home and didn't really get it for the first couple of years. And then I started to realize that I had been gifted a tradition by an elder and told to carry it. And I started to understand that that's actually really important, especially living in this Western culture where we've forgotten what it means to make offerings. We've forgotten what it means to honor the earth. We've forgotten what it means to honor the gifts of life and to say thank you for the blessings we're going to receive and the blessings we've already received. We just think of things as resources. Look at the devastation that we've caused on this beautiful planet right now. And so that was where my direct connection with the shamanic work from Peru, at least, began.
Did I tell you that I was there in
Peru?
That's where I
went.
went.
No, I didn't realize it was the same year.
And then I went to Bolivia, and then I also went out into, I had a similar experience for a day, and then drank chicha on the way back and got very sick. But chicha, it's a fermented corn drink that Westerners are best keep away from right in the beginning, right?
Yes, or drink it in very small doses.
Yes, but that I too, it took a while to realize what I had been given. And obviously my path has been, again, parallel really our paths in many ways, and just with our own signature as, the way we're doing it. But that was where my spiritual path got connected to the earth. I plugged into the Apus and to Pachamama in a big way, and it changed everything. So I wanted you to know we were there at the same time.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah.
So for those first couple of years after that journey, I would wake up after having been dreaming about Cusco and the Sacred Valley and those mountains and that land. And these are not the mystical condor dreams or Machu Picchu visions or anything like that. This would be I would wake up with the smell of hot eucalyptus and diesel and rotting fruit and dust, but it would be distinctly Peru. And I kept feeling pulled back. And so just around 2 years later, after I finished that master's degree, I went back. And it was at that point that the beautiful medicine ayahuasca entered into my path. And I had studied it when I was in graduate school and thought, I don't know about that. That sounds pretty intense. And I don't know that I am ever going to go in that direction. But I found myself called to work with one particular person, and the same message that had been pulling me along my journey that said, oh, go walk the Camino de Santiago, go to Peru, now said, come to this medicine and see what it will bring. And so I took that seriously. And so almost 2 years to the day after I left Peru the first time, I found myself back there and beginning that work.
Yeah, and that work I actually began in 2005, and it changes things. I mean, if it's part of your path, but what you said is so important. You were called to go there. Then your soul called you back, or some part of you called you back to do the medicine, and you've been pulled and you've been pulled. And that ability to feel that tug and follow it is so important. And you've become, that's your path. I mean, that is your path. And it's so beautiful to, and it has been mine too, Angela. And I sometimes people have said, you know, like, but what's the plan? What's the plan?
Right.
Yeah. I say it's my soul. That's what I say. I don't know what you call, but the tug is like, it's at the heartstrings, right? And it becomes stronger and stronger. So that, I mean, and you've been a musician during this time as well, correct? I mean, it's, yeah. And now have taken the work, your musician work, your shaman work, it's all integrated now.
Yes.
Yeah. And did you begin the shadow work when you started the ayahuasca? Was that the serious dive into that work?
I think that I had been dancing around it very closely for years, and I had the deep desire to see into myself and the true nature of my life, and to understand what things had led to other things in terms of what had worked in my life and what wasn't working. But when I drank ayahuasca for the first time, it was like all resistance is off. And I think now in retrospect, realizing that the part of me that wanted to run up to the edge and say, all right, let's do this, and then would be overwhelmed or hesitant to really dig into the depth of what I would see, especially in terms of shadow work. Yeah. Like I would be able to back off, but with ayahuasca, there is no backing off. No, there is only diving in, and the more you resist, the more difficult it is. So at some point you stop resisting and simply allow yourself to see what is true, and to begin the really important and sometimes extremely challenging work of clearing things and coming to understand where they're rooted, and making changes not only internally in terms of mind and emotion and energy, but making changes externally in terms of like, how am I in relationship with myself and the world and with others and with my work. And it's literally like you start pulling on the thread on the sweater and the whole thing starts to unravel.
Everything does. Grandmother ayahuasca is such a teacher. And one of the things it took me a few times before I really developed a, like personal relationship with her, that I could communicate and wasn't just overwhelmed. But the miracle of that work is that I've seen I even at one point I had grieved and really grieved the loss of my marriage and all that. But this time I went through it, and I actually went through it with the help of ayahuasca, experiencing all the disruption to the family that went on from the point of view of each of my 3 children, my former husband, and the dog. The suffering. You know what I'm saying? I actually experienced all that and wept a depth of I went down and down into it. And by that time I was okay. Like I knew to do that. And the miracle is that grandmother ayahuasca allows you to see that and brings you to a place of mercy that you've never been to for yourself. Like that it's the most exquisite shadow work. I'm just tearful as I think about it, because it's like you look at what you've done, look at the hurt you've inflicted, look at the pain, and you realize your own pain, that from whence that came. And it's just pure mercy for everybody. And that, you don't need to do ayahuasca to have that, but that's one of the places that you can learn it.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is definitely one of the mystery schools.
It's a big mystery school.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was back in 2007, 8, and your path has deepened and continued. You've really been back to Peru a lot of times now and taken many people. what's the journey with you like? It's not just sightseeing, you know.
Oh no.
And I mean, like, okay, there could be the Gong journey, but you know, the journey to Peru for the sake of that kind of clearing.
Sure. That's a topic that brings my heart much joy.
Yeah.
So I've been going to Peru almost yearly ever since 2007 at this point. There were a few years where I wasn't able to go. And some years I've been able to go twice or even 3 times. And at some point along the way, it became really clear that it was time to start to bring other people to see what I see and to experience this walk kind of concurrently. And especially having done the deep study of pilgrimage, and how that had been so transformational in my own life, being able to travel with that really clear intention, as opposed to just the awe of seeing a new place, but the desire to engage with the place,
Yes.
to know oneself better, and to see oneself in the midst of a different culture. When I was in graduate school, the type of work I was working with was autoethnography, which is exactly that kind of study,
Really?
the study of oneself in the midst of another culture.
Oh my.
So I was fascinated to see what other people's experiences would be like. Because my own journeys to Peru had not been the usual tourist style. I didn't just go on a retreat. I didn't go on a guided tour. I didn't even just go through the usual, cadre of tourist destinations. I would literally go slowly for 6 weeks or more every time, and literally follow my call from one place to another. And so I'd come to have relationship with both people and places that were pretty far off the usual tourist track. And so I wanted to be able to bring people who were prepared to be with that to these places. Like we took a group to Machu Picchu once. They were all sisters who we had been in relationship with and who had been involved in healing work with us. And by us, I mean my partner, Helen, and myself. And we went to Machu Picchu and decided that it was not something we would ever do again, because what we really wanted to do was to bring people to places where we could be quiet and still and listen. So working with plant medicine is a big part of the retreats that we lead in Peru. Most of those retreats have either 3 or 4 ceremonies, usually 3 with ayahuasca, and sometimes we'll add an additional ceremony with the San Pedro cactus, which is a big teacher there in the Andes Mountains. And we really take people to be in engagement with the medicine, with their own intentions already kind of carved out in advance. We usually do interviewing process with people in advance so that we know what they're working with, so that we can even kind of craft what is needed for each group. And then between ceremonies, we'd usually do ceremonies every other day. And between those ceremonies, like there are lots of the usual kind of tourist sites to go to, but we call up our friends, the people that we have known there for years, people who live there and who've lived there their whole lives sometimes. And we ask them to take us to places that are remote, but still accessible by car and foot. And we'll spend like hours or a whole day at a single place and rarely even see another person. Like there's this one beautiful temple near the city of Ollantaytambo in the Sacred Valley. And this is a place that you would never find if you didn't know how to get there already. It's like you go across a river and along a dirt road and through a couple of kind of towns and then along the railroad tracks. And then you park at the end of what appears to be a road. Maybe it's a road. Maybe it's under construction. It always looks under construction. And then you climb up something like 1,000 stairs. And then there's this huge serpent temple up at the top of the mountain. And there are beautiful carvings there. And There's a specific kind of carving that you'll see throughout Peru that's sometimes referred to as a portal. And it's a place where the connection to self, the connection to the Apu, where we are, and the connection to the land and the traditions is especially strong. And so we've been taken there by a guide and friend who leads us in ritual to open the senses of everyone in the group, so that once they get into the portal and they have their hands on the side of it, they're able to connect and receive messages and answers, and healing from being in contact with that. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to do the deep interpersonal work with the medicine and to be shifting energetically in such a profound way through that work. And then while everything is still open, to be able to go to these potent sacred sites and to be with them in a way that's not like megaphones and tourists, but literally stillness and silence and listening. And like, what do you see in the mountain? Do you see the face there? And to be able to learn the stories of the faces in the mountains. And
as you're speaking, I'm I also wandered, and I didn't go on any tours, and I found magic, and I didn't find that place that you're talking about, and that makes me want to go. But it's truly an adventure. Like Peru has the quality of everything, it becomes an adventure, and it's like, which is life really. Just to go one time, I was with a friend and we were going to buy a donkey and then we got into the town and then we couldn't find the way, and somebody helped us and said, come on, you know how people do that, like you start, now you're following somebody and now you're going like up and up and up and up and up, oh, now you're going over a bridge, and now and you never could have found it. And then we get there, and there really is a donkey, and a mother donkey and a baby donkey and a woman with the big hat, right? And that you, in a way, you're always moving into the unknown in Peru. And that's part of the shadow work. It's like learning to let go of the like control. You're not in control.
I think that's such a beautiful point to make. That is the work of ayahuasca for sure, but that is also the work of being on any sacred journey. And Peru is, because the land is so alive, and the sacred connection with the land has continued unbroken for thousands of years, unlike here in the States, where all of the native people who had sacred relationship with the land have either been forced off or manipulated or killed. I mean, Here it's very difficult to forge that kind of relationship. In Peru, if you're sensitive and open, it's very easy to be engaged with that pretty quickly. And we Westerners have ourselves upended nonstop in that kind of environment, because what do you do when there's no internet and your cell phone doesn't work and you're trying to figure something out and nobody else is in a hurry? We're used to being able to control, or at least believing that we're able to control almost everything in our culture here. And it's not true. It's an illusion, although it's a persistent one. And going to some place like Peru, where things unfold at their own pace and mystery happens right in front of you and you have no idea how, like magic happens and frustrations happen sometimes to push our buttons.
Exactly. It's so, I actually do have this in the book. It's probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. Right in Peru, I had been waiting to get my telephone. So the shadow of my kind and loving self is this entitled Westerner, right?
Yeah.
And I went down to Telefonica in Peru, in Cusco, and I had a major American hissy fit. and I did it in English because I couldn't get it out in Spanish. And I said things I hope no one understood. And I was truly so frustrated. I was so alone. I didn't speak the language really. And I just left with my, people were going like, they were moving out of the way. And I fell down. I fell on the ground and just curled up in a ball and cried. Oh. And people walked around me. I heard the word loca gringa a few times, loca. And while I was curled up, I realized what I had done. I felt deep shame. This is shadow work in a moment, by the way. Okay. So, and I was flooded with compassion for myself, and I picked myself up and I said, I am so sorry to everybody. And I went home and got under the covers and cried. And so part of my whole mission when I went to Peru was to get to the bottom of compassion. Like, what is it? You know, what is that power and force? Why can't we maintain it? And what that moment taught me of deeply facing my shadow, and publicly, by the way, so that's a way that the shadow gets faced sometimes with a lot of shame, is that we cannot maintain compassion for others until we are able to maintain it for ourselves. That was the goodness. And so shadow work it's filled with gifts. And let's talk for a moment about how, like, what you do and I do are like the same and different in many ways, you know. How would you, I mean, I see myself as a shaman as well, but not trained the same way. And you're a therapist in a way, but how would you distinguish the work?
So do you want me to talk about how I would distinguish my work from therapy?
For one thing, you're taking people out, you're having these live direct experiences. You're also using plant medicine. But how did you say they were traditions that they were on a parallel course, right? And in many ways, if someone doesn't know someone like you, right, then they go to psychotherapists, because many psychotherapists are the modern day shamans.
For sure, absolutely.
Right? But there's a focus on transformation in shamanism.
Right, and I think, having experienced a number of therapists in my life, with gratitude and with all my heart, one of the things that I found really challenging about it is that there seems to be such a focus on talking and thinking in most therapeutic models. And I will also acknowledge that there are so many wonderful somatic modalities that are also coming into the mainstream now. And I even was reading about one particular modality that my partner is interested in pursuing that brings together things like work with totems and talk therapy and somatic experiencing and things like this, which is amazing. But I think that shamanic healing specifically brings the gift of shifting out of that rational mind where we try to be logical and we try to stay in control and we try to defend and kind of define ourselves in certain ways. It shifts us out of that part of the mind into the more intuitive, conceptual, creative, archetypal kind of mind where we understand ourselves in completely different ways. And for me, I remember a therapist that I went to see at some point after I'd already started down this path that I needed some extra support at the time. And I got so frustrated with her, and I said, you know, I don't want to just change my thinking, although that's really useful to change your mind. I want to do something with the energy that's generated through thinking about something in a way that's not useful. Like, the energy still exists. Like, the mind creates energy, thought form creates experience. And she literally had no idea what I was talking about. And I soon ceased therapy with her because I realized that I could actually probably do my own work better myself, because shifting into the body and coming to understand, like, well, how do I feel things, not just emotionally, but how do I feel things in terms of shape and color and temperature and like connection with other ideas, does this feel like an animal? Does this feel like a certain kind of world? Like, I mean, these are things that some psychotherapists would be like, I think you might have a mental illness. Maybe not all.
Exactly. Now, Carl Jung, of course, he used tarot, he used shamanism. I mean, he's one of my, my heroes, really.
Yes, for sure.
He did take all this and bring it together. And I do too, by the way, but,
I don't doubt that for a minute.
and I know that's why I've had such a thriving practice, because when people come, they can tell the difference. But certainly people who are drawn to do work with you or to shamanic work, they're not usually the really heady people anyway. They already know that there's a more embodied way
Right.
that also includes, as you said, the totem world, the archetypal world, the ancestral world. So
Absolutely.
like the ancestral world, let's just touch on that. I mean, because as we're doing this work, we are actually healing time backwards. We're also clearing things for our ancestors.
For sure. And that's a modality that I've actually completed training in and am almost finished with the certification process, ancestral lineage repair and healing work, which is something that I came to in my own life after the death of my father, when I realized that there were things flaring up in my family of origin that didn't make any sense. Things that had been a thread throughout my life with my relationship with my mother, and things that seemed to be out of time in the way of, like, I'd been working for my entire adult life on trying to heal these things, and they seemed to not be shifting. And so I started to explore West African tradition with Malidoma Somé, just a little bit, and was able to do an ancestralization ritual with him for my father. And I started to realize that there are so many missing pieces in our culture. We're afraid of death. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to look at it. We want to mask it as much as possible. We want to push aside grief and to just try to go about life as usual and show up at work the next day. And, you know, I'm lucky that I'd already been on this path so long. When my father died, I was able to be in ritual with that immediately and to be in ritual with him immediately. And, but then I just started to really realize that this was a particular realm of the shadow that most of our culture hasn't even started to look at. So I sought opportunities to explore what was going on in terms of the Western mind and ancestral work. And most kind of cross-cultural shamanism approaches address it in a brief way, but don't necessarily go full in. And I realized that for my own life, I needed to go full in. So I found a training program with a great guy named Daniel Four. And I spent 1.5 years of my life doing ancestral healing work on my own family. And I was able to address 8 lineages, both of my parents' parents, and then a second tier as well. And I was not only able to do the spirit work of praying for healing for them, but to actually make direct connection with lineage guides that would then take me into the lineage and show me where things had broken down over the centuries or millennia. And so I actually have like a storyline for each of these 8 lineages, so that I understand what are the gifts, what are the wounds, how did those wounds begin, and how did they continue to affect people over time after the original wound was forgotten, and how is that playing out among the living in these lineages today. And I think as much as I want to bring healing and peace to my mother and my relationship with my mother, I came to realize that the living are sovereign and they have their own choice. I have no capacity to affect anyone who's alive through my healing work in this realm, at least. But I can change my relationship with it. I can change my understanding of what's going on so that I am able to be with it differently. And that's actually like the best possible option. That's what I've been seeking for over 20 years. And so for me now, like when I have a client approach me for the first time and explore, you know, what approach is best? I mean, is it like literally just energy healing or clearing, or is this inner child work and soul retrieval, or is it like, is ancestral healing going to get to it? And when I have a client come to me with family dynamic issues or repeated like issues in the family line, like the death of the second child or something like that, or everybody tends to have a certain illness that is not necessarily hereditary. Like I usually encourage doing the ancestral work because it goes beyond this person, this mind, this body, this lifetime, and digs deeper into the roots of it. And you know, it's something that it's been interesting as I brought this to clients that have done other work with me, and just clients that I encounter in the sound journey work that I do. The shadow scares people sometimes. And like, I've met people, I remember this one woman I met when I was up in like near Saranac Lake, New York. And she was like, she picked up the flyer, Ancestral Healing. She's like, oh, I know I need to do this, but I'm terrified. I don't think I can do that. And this is, you know, another expression of how our culture teaches us to be afraid of shadow work. And because it's perceived as darkness, it's perceived as suffering and death. Yes. And what I try to share with people, hopefully they're able to receive it in some small ways, that in ancestral lineage healing work, we are not going to sit down and dive headfirst into the poisonous energy between living or recently dead family members that you don't want to be with or think about. Like, and so I've had a lot of people over this, especially this last year, where I've been bringing this work to clients more directly. People don't want to talk about it sometimes, and that usually means they need to.
Yeah. Yeah. I always remember Jung saying, whatever you're resisting, you really need to look at, or when you're working on something and you kind of go out and you check out, that's the work right there.
Exactly. And I think you used that word at the beginning, spiritual bypass.
Yeah. The bypass.
Yeah. People are sometimes so afraid that if they go into the shadow work or the darkness in themselves, or like the navigating and trying to bring healing to the ancestral lineages that have been so challenging and painful, I think a lot of people are afraid they're going to get trapped in it or overwhelmed by it, or they're going to take it on for themselves.
The curse of something.
Yeah. And that is actually, like, with a good facilitator, none of that happens, because it's already set up in a way that it's protected, and those things have been considered, and that's not the point.
What's so beautiful work. I mean, and it's interesting at this time, so many people want to know their ancestry. It's more important. And part of healing the earth and healing ourselves is healing our lineage, because it's still here. The vibration of fear, of trauma, of, it lingers until we put our arms around it, really. I mean, it's the work. And so you and I came to this from different directions, and most people on many different paths. In fact, you'll smile at this. I had my women's group the other night, and there's one woman who's very afraid of death, and so she's been really brave, and she's taking this course to overcome her fear of death with Pema Chodron, the one Buddhist teacher. And Pema now has an app that you get a message every day, and the app is "You're gonna croak."
I love it.
So there's a message every day about the reality of impermanence. To desensitize. I love that. Right? Like that shadow. She's a great shadow teacher too.
Absolutely. I love it. That's really beautiful.
Thank you so much, Angela. Is there, like, of all the messages that you could give somebody right now from your wisdom and your love that you've been sharing, what's, something that viewers can take away and really hold from you?
I think that in my own life and in my own vision for our world right now, we have to find balance between the spirit work that is so important. Like for us, making offerings, like doing despacho, brings us into Aini, which in the Andes is the Quechua word for reciprocity, the sacred exchange of giving and receiving that is necessary for life to flourish and for respect and peace to happen. And so the spirit work is really, really important. But especially as we open ourselves to greater responsibility and greater love, it's really important that we don't do that spiritual bypass and check out. And this week especially being a week where we had a major election, like I know in my own past, I've just wanted to do the spirit work. But at this time, it seems absolutely crucial that we do the spirit work. We heal ourselves, we awaken ourselves, we come together in community, and then we ground that through concrete action in our societies and in our world. That's compassion in action. That is, I like to call it like 2 hands and a heart. I have 2 hands and a heart, and I want to walk that in the world, not only in terms of being among other spiritual seekers and people who are on the path of awakening, but how can I transform my life and my action to a path of service that is in connection with the greater good? How can I be involved in the political scene? How can I be involved in taking care of the environment? How can I be involved in dismantling injustice and racism and xenophobia and all of these things? How can I continue to awaken myself not only to spirit, but to being a much more kind and compassionate human being in this world? Because that is how we awaken and transform this world.
That's spiritual activism.
Absolutely.
And that's where we're headed. That's what we need. That's actually what this whole conversations is about, because everybody that, like yourself, who is doing this work is in their own way a spiritual activist, and you don't have to have a degree or be a shaman to do that.
Absolutely not.
It's how we treat one another. It's that Aini. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah.
And not being afraid to go and stand in the middle of something that is, I think some spiritual people would call it the Muggle world. We have to go and put our 2 feet on the ground and participate in that too, because here we are embodied in this life, in this world. And though we may be, in this world, but not of it, we may be spiritual beings having a physical experience. All of those things are the common, lingo in the spiritual world. We're here to be up to here in it, to give all of ourselves to it, and to learn everything we can, and to give all we can.
Yeah. Thank you for all that you are doing. And I know that you do a tremendous amount. And I'm kind of hankering for a gong ceremony myself soon.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Angela. Be well, and let's just, keep on with it. It's an endless path of love and connection and wisdom. There's no end to it. So
totally.
I will see you weaving on the path.
And I thank you, my sister, for all the good work that you're doing too, and bringing these conversations to the world is so important to inspire others to keep walking through. So thank you.
Much love.
Much love.